Well, thank you again for being here this morning and joining us at Bethany. Let's take out our message guides this morning, and I'll invite you to follow along in that way with our topic for this morning. This morning, we're going to begin a series on what I think might be 7 of life's most challenging questions. These, if you would, are the summer stumpers. They're tough questions, and they're questions that you might face as you have interactions with people that you would want to share your faith with. At the same time, these may be questions that you have. Just coming to Christ does not mean all of our questions necessarily, if you would, get answered. We're still left with, well, how does this work? And I'm not quite sure how this fits together. And so I'm sure in the next several weeks I'm going to answer all of these questions to your satisfaction, and you'll be happy with every one of my answers. And that's really not true at all, is it? But one thing that I can say is, as we deal with these questions each week, what I want to do is I want to bring it back to Jesus. I want you to understand that the answers to the questions that we're going to look at over these weeks are not necessarily primarily found in just being logical, that the answers are not necessarily found in being rational or reasonable, but I want to bring it back to the idea that the answers to the questions that we face with regard to some of these challenging issues really is rooted in a relationship and should be brought back to relationship with Jesus. And so over these weeks, I'm going to try to bring Jesus into each of these situations and each of these questions. And the reason is because there's no person who has more spiritual insight, who lived victoriously over all of the situations and the things that we face. He seems to be a very good place to go to figure out, well, what did Jesus have to say about that? So we're going to begin our series today with what I think is pretty apropos, and that is, why does God allow suffering and pain? Now, last week we were going to start, if I was here, with a different question, but it just so happened that the second week fit better as the first week, so God kept me out of the pulpit last week so that the second week could be the first week, and I'll just do the first week somewhere down the road. So this morning we're going to look at that idea. Why does God allow pain? Why does he allow suffering? Now, one of the things that I think is really a make or break issue for many pastors is how they deal with the extreme or the unexpected or the unique situations of ministry that can arise. I can remember, I don't think that I was at the first church that I was serving much more than a year or so. And I was a pup. I was just a wet behind the ears kid. I'm still wet behind the ears. I'm still trying to figure this out. But one of the boys in the youth group I was working with, his grandfather was ill in the hospital and was passing away. And I just got the sense that I needed to go down to the hospital. And so I went in the car, I got in the car, figured I would drive down and go and visit. And when I arrived there, it was obvious when I walked on the ward that something was not normal. And so when I pulled up to the room, the door was closed. And so I went to the nurse's station. I asked, I said, is anyone here? And so they said, they're actually in the family room. He just passed away. And I was like, whew. And so I met with the family in the family room, and we're sitting there together, and, some of them were crying, some of them were, it was, I don't want to say it was typical, but it was a family moment. And in that moment, they looked over at me and they said, would you do his funeral? And I said, sure. I said, if you would like for me to do the funeral, I said, I would be more than happy to do the funeral. And I said, we can talk about this, And so they said, no, right now. What? See, he didn't want to have any kind of public thing. He didn't want to have any kind of attention. But we just cannot let him go without having something. And so would you do his funeral here, now? And here I am, I just about slid out of my seat onto the floor. How am I going to bring comfort to this family? And what am I going to say? And I mean, how many pastors are walking around with a funeral stuck in their pocket? Nobody just, they say preach, pray, or die. And here I probably would have chosen the die part. Because so I said, okay. So I left them. I said, why don't you wait here? Let me go talk to the nurse. I talked with the nurse, and we went into the room together. And the gentleman was still there as he passed. They hadn't done anything. And so I said, the family would like to have a service. The gentleman didn't want anything, but they would like for me to do something here at the bedside. I said, can you help me with this? So we disconnected him. We straightened him out. We got a clean blanket and sheet, and we just made it as nice as we could. And I don't think that funeral was maybe 7 or 8 minutes long. But that stands in my mind as one of the most unexpected moments in ministry that I've ever had. What do you do when that kind of stuff happens? When pain and suffering just kind of are all of a sudden unloaded on you, and you're standing in the midst of that challenge, of that crisis. And let me just tell you, it's not an academic question. The question that we're dealing with, and these questions each week, are not academic questions necessarily. When someone is on life support, that's really not an academic question. When somebody is struck with tragedy, or there is an issue in a family or a friend or a relationship, or vocationally something has unwound, or financially your world has come undone, let me just say, there are things you can think about practically, but there is something that is much more to that. It's much more than just an academic question. And so this morning, I want us to kind of come to grips and begin to come to grips with some of these hard questions from perhaps a perspective that we haven't before. Some of us, we've rejected Jesus. Some of your friends have rejected Jesus because of the situations you faced. The road has just been hard. And the road that is hard has been long. And it seems like you just never come out of the rough spots. Or the rough spots have been so rough you just don't know how to process those things or put those things in perspective, how to think about those things. And if there was a God who is good, and if there was a God who cares, and if there was a God who really, if I really mattered to him, then why in the world would this happen? Why in the world would this happen? So this morning, I want to give you, in our brief moments together, I want to give you 4 ways that God enters into and does something about our suffering, enters into and does something about our pain as a way to answer this question this morning. And we're going to be looking at 2 passages, and so I hope you're going to follow along with me in that way. And so let me invite you, let me just say 2 passages first. Matthew chapter 26. If you're following along, you can do it in your message guide, or if you're using a Pew Bible, it's page 877. You can follow along in that way. And this passage here, this first passage that we're looking at, Matthew chapter 26, is the initiation of the Lord's Supper. It's the initiation of the table that we're going to come to in a few moments. And it's happening during the Passover celebration for God's people, for the Israelites. They're remembering the passing over from the Exodus account. And Jesus is with his disciples here in the upper room. And Matthew 26, this is how it goes. It says, "And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, he blessed and broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body.' Then he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So now turn over to Romans chapter 5, which is our second passage for today. And if you follow along in the Pew Bible, it's page 1002. And this is another place where we're going to put some perspective on our pain and suffering this morning. So Romans 5, beginning in verse 3, going down through verse 5, it says this, and not only that, but we also glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Now hope does not disappoint because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. So from these two passages, these two groups of verses, 4 thoughts about pain and suffering, 4 thoughts about how God enters into this, and this as a way to kind of come to grips with some of these things for ourselves, and why do these horrific, these hard things occur. And so the first thing this morning is notice this. We need to notice that God enters into our world of suffering and pain through Jesus. God enters our world of pain and suffering through Jesus. If you go back to Matthew 22, Jesus is in verses 1 and 2, he enters our world of suffering. He's taken on a human body. He's joined us in this sphere of trouble. And in verses 1 and 2 it says, now it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings that he said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. To be crucified. Jesus here is about to face crucifixion. This is the worst kind of death an individual could face in the Roman Empire. You're hanging on a cross until literally you are asphyxiated. It's a cruel death. It's a tortured death. And here God enters our world of suffering through, if you would, a broken body. It's not as if, listen to me, it's not as if God put the world together and he set it in motion and then stepped back. Here is the unique situation, if you would, where God steps into the pain, he steps into the suffering, and he does it through the person of his Son, who is going to be crucified, who is going to know and experience the worst kind of death that can be known or experienced, if you would, at least in the Roman Empire. Consider a little bit further down in chapter 26. Then one of the 12, called Judas, he went to the chief priests and said, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you? And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time, he sought opportunity to betray him. Jesus has spent 3 years working with people, a year and a half particularly, give or take, with these 12 individuals. And so here is Jesus. He knows, and he is heading towards crucifixion. He's entering into the pain that way through the brokenness of his body. And here he has one of these individuals into whom he has poured 3 years, at least a year and a half, specifically, intensely, and he's going to betray him for 30 pieces of silver. Jesus knows the pain of betrayal. If you go further down, verse 45, same chapter, he's instituted communion, and after communion, they go out to the Garden of Gethsemane. And here Jesus is going to pray in preparation and looking towards this crucifixion. He's praying and getting ready for that next day. He's troubled, and he asks his best friends to pray with him for 1 hour. And they can't do it. And so it is that 3 times they fall asleep. Follow along, 45 and 46. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. My betrayer is at hand. Jesus doesn't have a great group of friends. They can't stay awake an hour and pray with him. In verse 47, just after this, Judas comes with the religious leaders and with the elders and the people, and they come with clubs and they come with swords and they arrest him. It's a false arrest. It's a mockery. It's a shame. It's not legitimate. In verse 57 through 67, they go through a trial. It's if you would, it's the kangaroo court. And the one who should have been set free because there really was no basis for him to be charged is then having to endure all of this. It goes on to say that those who took him, verse 67, 68, they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ. Who is the one who struck you?" Jesus, all of the time, God entering into pain and suffering through the person of his Son. And then, if you would, one of his closest friends, Peter, will basically deny that he ever knew him, leaving Jesus abandoned by all of his friends. The picture that we get of God here, and that I want to present to you first, is that we don't have a God who is distant from our suffering. That we don't have a God who is, if you would, separated from the fact that we face pain. But he has entered into it through the person of his Son. He understands what it's like to have those hard moments. He understands what it's like to wake up and to get a call that you never expected. He knows what it's like to feel all of the different kinds of pain and all of the different kinds of challenge that we face. Because he, in the person of his Son Jesus, lived through it in our world. He didn't make the world and then say, "Hey, bonne chance. Good luck. Hope you make it." But God came from heaven and experienced the same kind of suffering that we experience. He's there with us in the midst of it. He understands. This is the first way. God, through the person of Jesus, entered into the pain. Second, God suffers and dies for our rebellion in Jesus. Why is there this pain and suffering? Why is it that it seems that everything falls apart? Why is it that things are nuts? Why does the unexpectedly bad stuff happen unexpectedly? Why does that happen? Well, if you go back to the communion portion, look at verse 26. Here they're eating together. And Jesus is soon, again, he's going to be crucified. He's going to go to the garden and then ultimately. And it says in verse 26, "And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, he blessed and broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body.'" At the very least here, Jesus is saying that the bread is a representation of himself. At the very least. It's a recognition that his body is about to be broken on our behalf. That his body is going to be offered up for us. He's going to suffer on our behalf so that we would not be broken by our sin. So that we would have the opportunity to get beyond the fruit of our sin and of our walking away with God, which is the pain and the suffering that we experience. And so not only does God enter into the moment through Jesus, but through Jesus he provides a way. He provides a way for the suffering and for a rebellion, if you would, to be fixed. So he also takes the cup, and it says in verse 27, he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins." He says to drink this cup, symbolic of his blood, which is going to be poured out on the cross in just a matter of hours. It talks about this new covenant in Jeremiah and in other places in the Old Testament. It gives forgiveness of sin, and it changes us from the inside out. He says, "Drink in remembrance. Do it to remind you that I paid the price, that I poured out my blood for your sin." And I think it's important to understand here, and sometimes we miss this because when it comes to pain and suffering, we get so self-focused. It becomes all about us and what we're experiencing, what we're doing, and what's going on to us. But enter into the moment here. It's making very clear to us here something that may be kind of underneath the surface. And that is that God really does take sin and the effects of sin seriously. That your pain and suffering, the effect of our sin, matters to God. That he does not like that. He does not like the place that sin has put his creation in. And he is doing something about it, not just by entering into it, but by also his Son paying the price on the cross to set things straight. He came from heaven, lived a perfect life, will suffer and die in our place to bring us back from sin, rebellion, and the effects, the pain and the suffering. This really is like the culmination, if you would, one person said, of the Bible story. God made a perfect world. He put two perfect people in the perfect world. They were there to manage the world under his lordship. But God said just one thing: don't eat of that tree. Don't eat of that tree. Now, quite honestly, I wonder how long that lasted. We don't know how long, if you would, things were good. But we know at some point following that Adam and Eve ate of the tree that God said for them not to eat of. And so it was that through their choice, through their rebellion, sin was manifest in the world, and in all of us. We were all drawn into it. And because of that, we're all messed up. We all have the issue of sin. We all are infected and influenced and impacted by pain and suffering. And God set into motion, ultimately through his Son coming and through his Son offering up his body, the bread, and his blood, the cup, so that could be fixed. God is not separated from your pain and your suffering. God is intimately involved. He didn't cause it, but he certainly put together a way for it to be overcome. And so it is that we go through this, and it's so interesting to me. And trust me, this past week gave me some time to think about this. And I had this person in my mind before, but it really kind of made me think about this person again. Do any of you know, if somebody knows who this is, I'd be stunned. I'd give you all the money in my wallet, but my wallet's in my office. Anybody know who this person is? This person is Stella Liebeck. Stella Liebeck is famous for one thing. She's the lady who loves her coffee hot, but when she went through the drive-thru and got the hot coffee and spilled it on herself, she decided that it would be good for her to sue. Do you remember this story back a number of years ago? And everyone was like, "Are you kidding me? How can you want coffee's supposed to be hot?" And isn't what she did kind of what we do to God? I mess up my world. I make bad choices. I do things that I shouldn't. They harm me, they hurt others. And then all of a sudden I say, "God, why can't you, what's the matter with you? Aren't you on my side? Don't you care about me?" And we turn to him and we blame him. God is intimately aware of every hurt, of every pain, of every suffering that we have and will go through as the effects of sin continue to roll out. But he wasn't content to let us sit there and stay here in the midst of it. He entered into it through Christ. And through his Son Jesus, through his body and through his blood that was broken on the cross, shed on the cross, he sets out to fix it and to make it straight again. Let's head over to the Romans passage for number 3. Romans, and again, if you're using the Bible, it's page 1002, and you can follow along there. But over in Romans chapter 5, we see Paul speaking here. And again, this is what he says. He says, and not only that, but we also glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance character, character hope. Hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. So here's the third thing, and it's this, that God brings good out of pain and suffering. Not only does he enter into it, and not only does he put in place the way for it to be fixed through Jesus, but God is able to, and God brings good out of pain and suffering. Now listen to me here. There is nothing, I don't believe God makes pain good or makes suffering good. Pain is bad. Suffering is bad. He doesn't change that. But what he is able to do is to bring good out of the bad. He's able to bring good out of those dysfunction moments, those disturbing things, those horrific settings, those challenging situations. Bad is still bad, and suffering still hurts, and pain is still painful. But somehow God is able to use those hard things in a way that we don't understand, and he's able to take, one person put it this way, I love this, he says, God is able to take the trash of your life and turn it into treasure. He's able to take the garbage that you experience and make it gold. And I never forgot when he said that. And that's what he's saying here. That's what Paul is bringing us to here in Romans 5. That through this, through tribulation, through pain and suffering, God is able to deepen our character. He's able to give us greater hope. He's able to give us a deeper, a new spiritual strength. And so part of the challenge God brings good is bringing good out of it. He identifies with it. He's done something about it, but he takes it and he makes it for us something that can be profitable. Follow along this way. This is our truth for today. And let me encourage you to just reflect on this week. Persevering through pain produces character and confidence. Persevering through pain produces character and confidence. Now, some may not see it that way, and some may say, I can't see a God who does that, who would let something like that happen to me. But some of you are going to walk through it on the other side. And you will walk and allow God to walk with you through the midst of it. And on the other side, even though the pain was still painful and the suffering was still hurtful, you will find as you trusted God that all of a sudden on the other side, the suffering was not pointless. And for the person who allows Jesus to walk through them in the midst of those things, you will find, and trust me, this week I have been finding that none of this is pointless. It's not pointless for the person who actually experiences the presence of Jesus through it, that he is able to take that which is bad and he's able to use it for good. Finally, let me take us back to Matthew chapter 26, and I want us to see these things building on each other. He enters into it with Jesus. He uses Jesus, and I quote unquote uses Jesus, that Jesus becomes the one who is the fixer. He is the one who stands in our place in order to deal with the issues of sin and the effects of sin. And that even as we walk through those things now, we still see that God is able to use the things that are hard for our good. But finally, let me suggest this, Matthew 26, verse 29. But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it with you, when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. As Jesus is initiating this meal in the upper room with the disciples, he says something here that I think is interesting. He takes the bread and the cup, and they're drinking today, that we're going to share in today, and he's soon going to die for their sins. And he says, but I'm not going to drink this cup until I come and institute my new kingdom, where I will take this broken world and it will all be fixed, where you won't have to worry any longer about what is bad God using for good, because it will all then, if you would, be good. And so he brings out something here that I think is important to understand, and something for us to look forward to. And it's number 4, that God frees the world from the things that corrupt it. That ultimately God is going to free the world from the things that have broken it. That he says, my Father's kingdom will be forever a place of enjoying the world as it was meant to be. And that's hope. That's hope. God enters a broken world. Jesus dies for the broken world to put it right. God uses the bad things for good. And then we get to look forward to God fixing the world once and for all so that it can be enjoyed and to be what he desired for it to be from the very beginning. I don't know. In talking with the doctors, some of the doctors say, you may come back completely. You may get full restoration of your nerve. You may get some of it back. One doctor said it's like 30-30-30 kind of thing. And you just may kind of be like Popeye. But I'll tell you what, I look forward to a day, and I hope you do too, when pain and suffering will be no more. No more. But in the meantime, we serve a God, and we have a God who loves us enough to enter into our moment through his Son. And not just enter into our moment, but allow his Son to take the place, our place, the place that we should have taken in order to make this stuff right. And so we thank him. If you're here this morning and you do not know Jesus as your Savior, boy, today would be a great day. Say, you know what, God, I have been walking in all kinds of just life stuff. I've had moments of pain, I've had moments of challenge, I've had moments of suffering. But I just thank you this morning, God, that I don't have to walk alone, and that you sent your Son to help me, to give me a relationship with you that will set right these things. And in the meantime, we know that God uses those bad things for good. It doesn't make the bad things unbad, but it means the bad things that we do go through, God is able to use those in ways that are unexpected as we trust him. And by grace, just as the table says, do this in remembrance of me, do this until I come. We look forward to a day when God will set all of these things straight. And by grace will live in a world and live in a way as he designed it to be in the very beginning. If you would, he's going to take us back to the garden. And so today, why does God allow these things? Why does God allow these things? 4 simple, I hope Jesus connected thoughts for you about what I think to be one of life's toughest questions. As you head out this week, you're going to notice on the back of your message guide, we have been trying to be a church that grows in connecting with people, loving others, being a blessing. And one of the ways to do that is to just get to know people and to engage them in conversation. And one of the things that I want to do this summer through this series is give you some simple ways to connect with the people that God puts in the path of your life. It may be a family member, a friend, or a coworker. But on the back, what I'm asking you to do is to take a few moments and reflect on the question of the week, and to write down your thoughts as to how you might answer this question. And just kind of put it in there. And then what I'm going to ask you to do, if you would be so bold, is to do this, is to share your answer to this week's question with an unsaved friend. Ask them what they think of your answer and how they might answer the question, and then briefly reflect on their response below. So you've heard a little bit about what I think of this question. What would you say? And then use this as an opportunity. Say, you know what, my pastor's going through a series. He's talking about summer stumpers. And this past week we talked about pain and suffering, and boy, there's plenty of pain and suffering in our world. And he encouraged us to just talk to somebody to figure out, what do people think about this? Here's something that I think. What do you think? And use this as an opportunity to engage a neighbor, a friend, a coworker, or someone in just a brief conversation about spiritual things. People have tough questions. Let's have a conversation about it.